today that Dan is going to play for us this morning, so listen carefully.
Good afternoon, Breaking Bread. I am using my new toy called Text to Voice. Pretty cool. Wanted to get you caught up on what's happening. Praise God I'm in no pain. Still no voice, and when I try to talk my breathing shallow. The vocal cords are supposed to be parallel to each other, so when you breathe there vibrates between them producing sound. My left vocal cord is paralyzed at an angle away from right vocal cord, so they do not vibrate together and too much air escapes between the cords. You guys just had your first voice lesson, no charge. We see my surgeon tomorrow. Hopefully he could tell us how all this happened. He's a dynamic Christian and personal friend who prays with his patients before surgery. This is the first time in 30 years this has happened, and he feels terrible. As much as I appreciate your prayers for my healing, please pray more so for his healing, not to feel guilty. In this downtime, and because I'm on heavy regimen of prednisone, my immune system is shot, so I've self-quarantined myself. I'm getting lots done on my second book. I know the Lord guessed lot is again on me. My encounters with Jesus Christ. His mom is one of my editors. Sorry about the sermon, guys. Have a great teaching with the greatest men's Bible teacher we are so blessed to have. Love you guys. The ushers will come forward for the morning offering.
All right, so his left vocal cord is paralyzed away from the right one, so he can't make sounds. The surgeon, who is a strong Christian, feels terrible. It's the only time it's ever happened to him in 30 years worth of surgeries. So they're having a meeting, but Ken asked that we not only pray for his voice, but also pray for the surgeon, because he feels terrible and feels guilty about something he may have done that took away Ken's voice. So for this week, if you guys could pray for that, I would appreciate it. Also on a lesser level, Dana's not feeling well. He's down with something. If you could lift Dana up this week. He literally couldn't join us. He's going to bed. And Lee has the honor of having a wisdom tooth out at his age. So I'm sure that's not fun either. So if you could remember Lee, Dana, and of course, Ken and Ken's surgeon this week, I would appreciate it. Thank you, Dan, for making all that happen. I appreciate it. All right. If you guys will turn to me, we're in Ruth chapter 2. If you have not kept up with the story, I would strongly recommend you go back and listen to chapter 1 on YouTube. It's not so much that you missed part of the story, it's how much content the stories tell, how many lessons there are in the story. You really don't want to miss that. I mean, Ruth, as I've tried to tell you, is just one of my favorite books, because at every turn, there's a lesson for us. The book is written kind of in like a 4-act play. Today we begin act or scene 2. By way of getting you quickly caught up just on the story, not on the lessons. You have to go back and watch the videos for the lessons. You had a family in Bethlehem. There was a famine, probably drought related. The family head was Elimelech. His wife was Naomi. 2 boys, Mahlon and Chilion, and they decide, from what we can tell without consulting God or praying about it, they flee Bethlehem to the neighboring country of Moab to get away from the famine. It was supposed to be a short trip. Now, it wasn't the process of fleeing that was the sin. It was probably just because they didn't seek God before making that decision. So Moab was an enemy country of Israel. The trip was a disaster from the get-go. Shortly after the move, Elimelech, the head of the family, dies. The boys, Chilion and Mahlon, marry Moabite girls, which is potentially problematic. And those 2 girls' names were Orpah and Ruth. And then as the story progresses, a short trip turned into a 10-year trip. And in that 10 years, both Chilion and Mahlon died. So the dad has died. Both sons have died, leaving Naomi husbandless and childless. And all she has is Orpah and Ruth. Now, there was genuine love between the girls and their mother-in-law. And this bled through the story quite prominently last week. There's a scene as we close out last week where they're all gathered outside of Moab. There's tears, the waterworks are going, and Naomi's insisting the girls stay in Moab, and they're young enough, they can remarry, they can have children, they can start life over again. And how hard it would be for them to come back. Although selfishly, Naomi wanted them to be with her, she knew it would be in their best interest to stay behind. Well, Orpah eventually takes that advice and she fades from scene, Act 1, and we never hear from Orpah again. But Ruth issues this famous declaration, which is quoted in weddings and so forth, that, your land will be my land, your people, my people, your God, my God. Where you go, I will go, blah, blah, blah. And this is this wonderful declaration where Ruth literally passes from following the Moabite gods of Chemosh and others. And now she makes her declaration, I'm going to follow Naomi and I'm going to follow Yahweh, the one true God. Now, not an easy journey, about 55 miles back to Bethlehem. They arrive in Bethlehem. Everybody's excited to see them. But Naomi is a broken woman. She's lost literally everything as she came back in and said, don't call me Naomi, which basically means pleasant, but call me Mara, which means bitter. Now we know during this period of time, through just analyzing the text, that Naomi had a profound impact on her girls. On her daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah. So it wasn't like Naomi didn't have a walk with God. She did have a walk with God even in Moab, because obviously Ruth is highly influenced by her mother-in-law and makes this declaration that she's going to follow God, Yahweh, the one true God. So we can kind of make some suppositions along this line, but as scene 1, Act 1 closes, they're back in Bethlehem now. Now wait, they're penniless, they're poor, they have no jobs and no viable means of support. And so the scene closes. Now we start with chapter 2, verse 1. And we're only going to go through about 9 verses today. So join me, verse 1. There was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. Now, Naomi apparently had this kinsman. The text is silent. We don't know how he was related to them. We don't know if he's a cousin. We don't know. All we know is he was a kinsman of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. The text also tells us right here that he was a man of great wealth. I wanted to point something out. We'll have a couple of lessons along the way. But during the time of famine, when Elimelech and Naomi and the boys left Bethlehem and went to Moab, Boaz made a decision to stay behind. He never left. And God provided for him, and not only provided for him during that time of famine, but he made Boaz a man of great wealth. Now, Naomi made this choice 10 years ago. It was a choice that was made in a hard time, a time of famine. But just because circumstances, now listen, just because circumstances were difficult didn't mean they had to make a wrong choice. Notice one thing about the text. They come back to Bethlehem. Is it still there? Has the famine wiped it off the map? No. City's still there. People are prospering. Yes. They all have families. They've got food. Nobody apparently perished in the city, plummeted into a desert wasteland because of famine. No, they were still there. And also notice one thing. Everybody seems to be more blessed than Naomi was. Naomi lost her husband, both boys, a daughter-in-law, and comes back literally penniless with no viable way of supporting herself. So, first lesson, sometimes we justify wrong choices because of difficult circumstances. We have to know and trust that God will strengthen us and even bless us to make the right choice, even under difficult circumstances. Now, I thought of an example of this. You ever been in a socially awkward situation where somebody asks you a difficult question and you tell a little white lie? That's what we call it, a white lie. There is no such thing. Now, it's an innocuous, harmless lie that nobody's ever going to be able to fact check or know what the straight story is, and it gets you out of an awkward situation. Have you ever been there and done that? Okay. This is what we're talking about. From the small to the large, just because you get under the gun doesn't mean you have to make the wrong choice. It is human nature. You want to get the pressure off, and you know if you answer the question honestly, the pressure is probably going to increase, not decrease. But truly, honesty is the best policy. Making the right choice is always the right choice. All right, let's go back to Boaz. Now, I'm going to give you some foreshadowing of Boaz that we know these facts based on what future texts are going to tell us about this man. But I wanted to paint an accurate picture of who Boaz is. First of all, we know that he's wealthy, he's rich. Later, we're going to find out that he was influential in his community in the town of Bethlehem. He was connected. We know he was a landowner from a future text that we're about ready to see. Also from a future text, we're going to see that he's a kind and considerate employer. He cares for his employees and his employees like him. We're going to see that Boaz is a gentleman who shows respect and courtesy to others. We're going to find that Boaz is a sensitive leader who, when he compliments people with genuine praise. He doesn't just blow smoke up the rear end. He literally finds good qualities about people and makes sure he gives them genuine praise. We're going to see that Boaz is generous, that he's a generous benefactor to those who have less than he does. Also, later on in the story, we're going to see he's a strong spiritual leader and a man that chooses to use his blessings as a conduit for happiness to others who don't have as much as he does. We're also going to see he's a man of high moral character. Why am I elaborating all these attributes of Boaz? Because Boaz in our story is going to be a type of a person. This whole story is like a metaphor, an allegory. And Boaz is going to, even though he was a real person, he has all these outstanding qualities because he's going to end up representing someone to us later on in the story. And then the last thing before we leave verse 1 is there's a peculiar thing that's not going to be apparent to you in your English translation. The text just simply says in English, he was a relative or a kinsman of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. But it's very important to look at the Hebrew word that's used here, because it's a very unusual Hebrew word. It's goel, G-O-E-L. And the reason it's unusual, it's not used frequently when talking about a relative or kinsman, and it means something more than just a relative. It was like he's a special family representative, kind of a chieftain of the clan or a chieftain of the family, that family tree. So it has much more impact when you say he was a goel of Naomi's husband. He was a kinsman. He was a special family representative on Elimelech's side. And last thing I'll tell you about Boaz, you got to love what his name means. Basically, it means in him is strength. It'll give you goosebumps when you see who he represents later. But his name means in him is strength. All right, let's move on to our story. We've been introduced now to Boaz, verses 2 and 3. So Ruth, now we're back to Ruth and Naomi, and you can picture them wherever they're staying for the night. Then the day has dawned. They have nothing to eat. They have no money. They have no job. They have no food. So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him in whose sight I may find favor. And Naomi said to her, go, my daughter. Then Ruth left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she, Ruth, happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now, what is this talking about? What is gleaning? Let me give you a little historical context. In Jewish law, specifically Leviticus 19, 9 and 10, there was a provision made to care for the poor that were among you, the widows, the poor, the strangers in the land. What Leviticus 19 told them to do is it commanded the farmers in Israel that they are not to completely harvest their fields. If you will, they're to cut corners in the harvesting, always leaving some grain behind. Also, and this was a two-part process. You had the reapers, which were generally men. They carried scythe-like instruments that would chop the stalks of grain off pretty much close to ground level. Then you had the women employees who would follow after the reapers, and their role was to take the grain that was now lying on the ground in stalks, and they were to gather the stalks up and then tie them together in bundles. And then another group would take these bundles and load them onto carts, where later they would go to a granary where there was a process of separating the grain from the chaff and the stalks that they were cut from. Now, what Leviticus said is that the poor could follow this process as it worked through a field, and any grain heads that broke off and fell off of a stalk, or it even specifically said if one of these ladies or gentlemen, as they pick up the stalks as they're tied together and they drop accidentally a bundle on the ground, they were commanded to leave it on the ground and not pick it up. And this was kind of a social assistance program in Israel. Farmers were not to completely harvest their fields, so the poor and needy could come and glean the remains for themselves. And it was a wonderful way of helping the poor. It commanded the farmers to have a generous heart. Don't be greedy. I've blessed you. Don't be greedy. You leave some. And it also provided a way for the poor to be active and work for their food, so they can provide for their own needs and have dignity. Great system. Great system. So Ruth, of her own initiative, goes to Naomi and says, Naomi, let me go out and work today in the fields. Now, Ruth must have been aware of, because Naomi taught her of this provision in Leviticus. And so she said, I want to go. I want to go provide for both myself and for you, Naomi. And you just see this wonderful, hardworking spirit in Ruth. Now, then the text gives a word that's it's very unusual, because we all know what this means. She just happened to come to the part of all the fields that she wandered out and went into. She happened to go into Boaz's field. Now, it may seem like to Ruth and maybe to Naomi that this was happenstance, but this was not happenstance. Ruth came to that field because God was guiding her to that field. And it's just a wonderful part of the story. When you look back from chapter 4 and see this pivotal moment, you can see the hand of God at play. And this is going to be part of your main message. This is a great way of seeing how God's guiding hand works. If Ruth had stayed home and just prayed and prayed and prayed for God's provision, because they were widows, they were starving, they had no food, they had no money, and this is what Ruth did, she probably would have ended up waiting a really long time and then still would have gone to the wrong field. What she did is I imagine in my mind, because of Naomi's example, they prayed that day in the morning, and then Ruth simply moved forward, and in doing so experienced the very steering hand of God in the process. Many times when we're walking in the Spirit, we can only see the invisible hand of God in the rearview mirror. Now think about that in your life. God orchestrates a crazy series of events, and when you're in the middle of them, you don't have any idea God is orchestrating all this. And it's only when you look back through the rear view mirror of the past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, do you see God's guiding hand in your life. We can sometimes make problems for ourselves when we stand still too long, frozen, trying to look for his hand leading us forward. So many times, God just wants us to trust him and go. And here's your second lesson of today. A rudder only steers a moving ship. So a rudder can't steer a ship unless the ship is going forward somehow, some way, under propulsion. And then that little bitty rudder can move that great big ship. Now, I'm going to wrap that into your main message, so just bear with me on that. Let's go to verse 4-7. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem out to his fields, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And all his employees said, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz turns to his servant. Now, this is kind of like his supervisor on duty there. He says to his servant, who is in charge of the reapers, now this is Lynn's emphasis here, whose young woman is this? Now, picture this. He's got a large field. We're not talking an acre here. Large field. There's probably dozens and dozens and dozens, just literally scores of workers out in the field. Boaz comes, he greets them, they greet him, great relationship. And out of all that, his eye, one of them catches his eye. And he may have said that to the supervisor, and maybe the supervisor mistook his intent. Maybe the supervisor at this point is a little concerned that he let this Moabite girl in his field to glean. We don't know. The context is not clear, but I can imagine maybe he's a little uncomfortable. The boss shows up, the boss wants to know, points to one person out of that hole and says, "Who is she?" Now, the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered him and said, "It is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And the young girl said to me, 'Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves.' And so she came, and she's continued working from morning till now, although she rested a little briefly in the house." So, first of all, great illustration of Boaz, great illustration of a good relationship between employee and employers. And you can kind of see Boaz's heart and character. He heartily greets his workers. He's not this cruel taskmaster with a whip. "How come you haven't gathered more grain? What's taking you so long to load it onto the carts?" No, he genuinely was glad to see his workers in the field, and look at their response. They weren't brown nosing. They were glad to see the boss. You can just see this great relationship that he had. It speaks a lot about Boaz, and you can kind of extrapolate from that. A great way to look at a person's character is to see how he relates to his staff and how his staff relates back to him. If the employees all hate the boss, it probably says something about the boss. And now let's look at Ruth. Ruth had every right, according to Leviticus, to be in that field and glean. Did she strut in there and go, hey, Leviticus 19 says, I have this right? Do you know people who do that? They're really quick to throw their rights up in your face. Nope. Here's what Ruth did. She sought out the supervisor and said, may I please have permission to glean and gather in this field? So when the supervisor reports this to Boaz, he's not sure where Boaz is coming at. Is he upset with him because he let a Moabite in the field? He's not clear, but the supervisor gives her two wonderful compliments. Number one, he said she was super polite and she came and actually asked for permission to glean. And number two, she's worked her butt off the whole day. She's not been a slacker. She's not been, taking the easy stuff. She's been out here from morning till now. We're assuming this is late afternoon when Boaz came out to look at his field. And she's been at it all day except for one brief break. So hard work, polite, submissive, respectful. Okay. Now, one sidebar thing. I thought this was interesting. One of the scholars brought this up, and I thought it bears repeating. Remember the time frame we're in. It's the time of Judges where everybody did what was right in their own eyes. How many Jewish landowners would even follow Leviticus 19 at this point? Probably many of them were out there harvesting every bit of grain they could possibly get a hold of because it meant more money. Not Boaz. Boaz is following the law. Boaz is respecting Leviticus 19 and allowing gleaners to come in his field. Again, says a lot for his character. Here's a lesson. Here's a lesson. We're always under inspection. Now, do you think Ruth, all she's thinking about, she doesn't know anything about Boaz. She doesn't know anything about Boaz's field. Never even heard the guy's name before. She's just in a field and she's gleaning. Keep in mind, that's all she knows at this point in the story. She's just working hard, gleaning. She doesn't know she's standing out. She doesn't know the supervisor has been watching her all day. And so I think there's a powerful lesson there for us. We don't always know that people are watching us, but we are. When you're just going about your day-to-day, mundane, day in and day out chores, tasks, whatever, interacting with people at the store, going to the gas station, whatever, you're being watched. You're being watched as to see how you're walking with God during good times, during bad times, during mundane times, during monotonous times. What they see about you will make a difference. We need to remember, guys, that we are always acting as the Lord's ambassador. No matter what we're doing, we're always representing Jesus Christ. Ruth was and didn't even know it, but it made a profound difference in what happens next in the story. Let's go to verse 8 and 9. So Boaz has already noticed her. He gets this phenomenal report from the supervisor. I think, and again, I'll read you some other things, but I think he was immediately attracted to her. I just can't help but believe that. Why on earth did he pick her out among a field of people? I think it was immediately like, ooh, whose young woman is that? And I really think that's the way he said it. That's Lynn's interpretation. Verse 8, then Boaz, for the first time, They meet. Boaz comes up to Ruth and says, "You will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." So the first thing he says is, listen, I don't know how this came out, but he's just like, I want you to glean only in my fields from now on. I want you to hang close to my young female field workers, the ones that tie together the stalks of grain. You stay close to them. You're going to be taken care of. You're going to be protected. And the fact that he uses the word "my daughter" does imply, although the text never tells us their ages, that he was probably older than Ruth. He may have been roughly the same age as Elimelech or somewhere in there. Some scholars have speculated. We really don't know, but he probably would have not have used "my daughter" had there not been a somewhat significant age difference between himself and Ruth. And he said, listen, you stay right here, and you stay in my field. And there Ruth is going to find companionship with the other young ladies. Automatically, everybody's aware, we better not make fun of her because she's a Moabite. We better not show visible prejudice towards her because she's a Moabite, because Boaz is taking a shine to her. She's going to find protection. He's already told, he put his cloak of protection around her and says, nobody mess with Ruth. None of you young guys hit on her. She's to be left alone. And she doesn't even have to draw her own water. He says, hey, if you need water, if you get thirsty, you go drink from where the young men drink, where the water's already drawn from them pots. So I just believe that there had to be an instant connection there between Boaz and Ruth. And it's maybe, and I've never read Harlequin romance novels, but this sounds like a good intro to a Harlequin romance novel. And I just think Boaz saw Ruth, was immediately drawn and connected to her, and then starts to begin to take care of her. Now we don't know what Ruth even looked like. The scripture doesn't tell us. When we study the book of Esther, we're told that she's beautiful. Ruth, we don't know, but her name means glamour. Loosely translated, Ruth's name, roughly translated, means glamour. So I don't think she was hard on the eyes. Now, she had been out in a field working all day. She's in peasant clothing, but there was something about her that just caught his eye. Now, I know Linda's on the broadcast with us today, and I'm sure the minute Ron saw Linda, it was a Boaz and Ruth moment. And I'm trying to see if they get off mute to either confirm or deny whether that's true. But what we're going to talk about after the break will be your main message. As you can see, we're running way ahead of schedule today. Today's main message, just to kind of draw you back in, is going to be how God leads. How God leads. So I hope that will be enough of an enticement. We will see you back here in the next 60 seconds to 120 seconds, and we will finish early today. See you back in a few.